Okay, good morning everyone, and apologies I'm not there in person, but hopefully this recording method will work and you'll be able to hear the talk. So I'm talking on the plight of the curlew. It's a bird I've been working with in mid-Wales for quite a few years now. If we have a look at the basic background ecology of the bird, curlews breed across the middle latitudes, certainly the north, as far as the subarctic, and in boreal temperate steppe zones, preferring damp or wet terrain with drier patches. In Britain, it's both an upland bird, breeding up to 550 metres above sea level, and also in the lowlands. So I jumped a slide there. After the breeding season, Eurasian curlews generally shift to coastal habitats, especially mudflats, sands extensively exposed at low tide, and rest on adjacent salt marshes and foreshores. They're omnivorous, though feed principally on invertebrates. They're also long-lived birds, which is important for the story of their declines, living for up to 20 or 30 years, and they're very, very site faithful, both on the breeding and wintering grounds. So this is the worldwide distribution. The darker brown at the top shows them right across Asia, Russia, Europe, and into the United Kingdom. The second layer down is these passage areas, and the wintering grounds, as you can see, are right around the coasts of Europe, Africa, Asia, and they can go quite away for migrations. Others just do short hops to their nearest coast. So on a tacky, very nice looking worm. In Wales, curlew are found in a wide variety of habitats, from both our moorlands down to moorland edge and into lowland pastures, especially down the borders. Pasture breeding birds can be in unimproved fields, but they also will find any field they like, up to intensive silage meadows. They usually move to the breeding grounds in March, eggs laid in April or early May. Clutches are up to 4 eggs usually. Nest is a small scrape in the ground lined with grass. Usually 30 or more days of incubation. The young are what we call nidifugas. They leave the nest immediately on hatching, and then they fend themselves, but overseen by the adults who stay in the area. Young feed on insects, so wet flushes are an important source of food. It's then up to another 38 days for fledging, when the young become independent. So that's 38 days when they're still being guarded and looked after by the adults. If a nest fails early in the season, birds usually relay, less likely if the nest fails late, and they can relay 2 or 3 times. Birds usually start leaving the breeding grounds in July or earlier if they've failed. Their wintering grounds tend to be coastal, although some winter at inland sites. These are a few of the nest sites down the Welsh borders, in an unimproved field, moorland edge, rough pasture, and in a very intensive silage field. So they're not restricted by habitat, really. They like any open meadows, but they do like it open so they can see any predators coming from a distance. As we said, they're very site faithful. This is a tagged bird in North Radnorshire. As you can see, they keep to a fairly small home range, but also occasionally the male goes out and roosts at a distance. We're not quite sure why that's for, but the majority of the time during the breeding season, they keep to a very few fields. But given the nature of the farms in Mid Wales, that can mean they're covering 4 or 5 different land holdings, which is important for conservation issues and agri-environment schemes and such like. A lot of our birds, we had 10 tagged birds this year in Mid Wales, last year, sorry, and a lot of them went to islands, such as this bird that spent the winter on the Wexford Slobs, just on the east coast of Ireland. There also seem to be very site faithful in the winter. These are 4 tagged birds on the Dovey estuary. Each colour is a different tagged bird, and as you can see, although they've got the whole of the estuary to feed in, they tend to each have their own very small home range. To look at the history of curlew in Wales, the Historical Atlas of 1875 to 1900 described it as abundant in all North Wales counties and Breconshire, which was always considered Wales in those days. common elsewhere except in Glamorgan and Pembrokeshire. There seems to have been an increase in the population across Europe around the start of the 20th century, an increase this time was dramatic in the UK. Curlews extended their breeding distribution from moorlands into lowland meadows, with some declines on the moorlands. There is some evidence of decline since the 1950s, increasing by the time of the 1998-91 atlas, with losses in South Wales, especially Pembrokeshire, where the species have been lost from the great majority of squares since the 68-72 atlas. The 2007-11 atlas shows further declines, particularly in the western counties such as Carmarthen, Ceredigion and Merioneth. This was a part of patterning the decline in the west, declines in western Scotland and southwest England, and a particularly severe decline in Ireland. The atlas stated that the loss of breeding curlew from Ireland and parts of western Britain is one of the key findings over the last 40 years. And here we can see that, and it's especially if you look at the declines in Ireland, it's especially dramatic. But you can also see the loss of breeding birds completely from, more or less completely from Pembrokeshire and southwest England as well. Around 58,500 breeding pairs. The UK currently holds approximately a quarter of the global Eurasian curlew population, with estimate for Wales having a wide range from 400 to 1,700 pairs, which shows we need to do a lot more work on surveys to get the more accurate figure for that. National monitoring coordinated by the BTO shows that this population has been in long-term decline since the 1970s and has almost halved in the UK over the last 20 years. In Wales, the population is declining at a rate of about 6% a year, which many colonies are on the verge of local extinction. This means there is a potential for extinction as a breeding bird in Wales by 2033. Britain also supports some 125,000 wintering curlew birds, numbers which have declined by more than 25% in 25 years, and many of these birds are breeding birds from continental Europe. As a result of this Europe-wide population decline, Europe is red listed as vulnerable to extinction in Europe, and globally it is unfortunately considered near threatened. There were 9 species of curlew in the world. The Eskimo curlew has not been since 1963 and is presumed extinct. Slenderbill curlew was last seen in 1998 and is now considered probably extinct. In my work on waders around the world, I've seen 2 slenderbill curlew, and having seen a bird that is now considered extinct is a very sobering experience and not something you'd hope you'd experience, and also means that we really have to react and work hard to make sure we don't lose another species of curlew. We must ensure that our curlew, the Eurasian curlew, does not meet the same fate. There are a few reasons for decline. The main one is predation at the moment on young and eggs. So although birds, as we say, are very site faithful, they're returning to the same site every year. People saw them coming back, assumed they were doing all right, but in fact they have not been producing viable young. And this is due to high levels of predation. The diagram below is from a study in Shropshire. The left-hand side is with over 50% of the predation is by fox, and then going round clockwise. Surprisingly, the next section, the blue, is sheep, followed by crows, followed by the nest deserted for unknown reasons. Loss, sort of purplish one, is unknown, and then the pale blue with nearly a quarter is predation by badger. Habitat loss over the years has been another thing, with fields being drained, built on, afforestation, etc. And the move to silage from hay meadows has also had a big impact, as a lot of the birds, as they keep returning to the same field, but they get killed during silaging, either on eggs or the young get killed by mowing, during the mowing of the silage. A couple of years ago, a Wales action plan for the recovery of curlew was produced by a wide range of bodies called Golfinia Cymru, Curlew Wales. This includes NRW, RSPB, Wildlife Trusts, Basque, Game Conservancy Council, and many other organisations. they have come together and produced this plan. It was launched by the minister last year. Unfortunately, it's still a plan and there's been very little action due to lack of funding. The main actions proposed by the plan are surveys. We need to know where the curlew are to target action on them. And surprisingly, for such an obvious bird, we don't have a very accurate figure for the number of birds or where they are in Wales. Nest protection is being undertaken in many cases with electric fencing of nests to try and reduce predation. This has proved very successful for stopping predation on eggs, but the problem is then as soon as the young hatch and start moving around, they are not protected and they still get predated as they cover large areas to find food. Head starting is being undertaken in Shropshire. This is where eggs are taken, hatched in captivity, and the birds raised until fledged, and then they're released back into the areas where the eggs are taken from. This is proving successful. It hasn't been going long enough to show how successful, but it is an incredibly labour-intensive bit of conservation. Predator control is being undertaken on some projects. This is really only working where you're covering a large land ownership, so you can do coordinated predator control over a big area. And it's still unclear as to whether this really has any long-term impact on the predator levels. Habitat management is another action where habitat is managed, damp areas created, rough areas cut, etc., to produce ideal mosaic of habitats for the birds. The action plan also brought in the concept of important curlew areas. This was based at the knowledge of curlews in Wales at the time of the writing of the plan. And as you can see, most, apart from the one on Anglesey at the top left there, most of the important curlew areas are down the western side of Wales, where we still have reasonable populations. And the biggest one, obviously, is this one, is the Montgomeryshire. It covers North Radnorshire area and is contiguous with curlew country, important curlew area in Shropshire. So this is a very important area for curlew. And then we've got Island Moor and Brecon Beacons and Elan Valley, also within Powys, covering. So we do have an important population in Powys within the Biz area, and I think recording and action for curlews is very important in this area. This was a survey I did of Montgomeryshire and parts of North Radnor in 2021. Found over 50 pairs of curlew. Highlights the importance of this area, and this is not a comprehensive study. I didn't have enough time to do, or landowner access to do every field in the area. So there's undoubtedly more birds in the area that we don't know of, but it highlights the fact that Montgomery and North Radnor are very important areas, and as we know, there's a large population in Shropshire contiguous with this site, so it's an important area to work on. That's curlew. As I said, surveying is very important. We need to know where the birds are. There is no really one survey method. It depends on the aims of the survey, the habitats, the area to be covered, and obviously the resources we have to do it. All records are useful, but please try and not disturb birds. Don't find nests, just find out if they appear to be nesting and record that. Even if you just cover your own area by walking the lanes and the public footpaths and record any curlew seen on a map with a grid reference, that's really important to build up our knowledge. Number of birds and the behaviour is important, whether they're calling, alarming, flying over which direction, or sitting regularly in the same field can tell us a bit about how likely they are to be nesting. And if you do meet the landowners, can you talk to them and ask them if they'd be up for permissions for people to come in and fence nests in the future? I'd say unfortunately we don't have resources for this at the moment, but it is something we're hoping for in the near future. Obviously, send all your records into Biz. The record centres throughout Wales are coordinating on this, so the all curlew records submitted to each record centre will come back to the people working on the ground on curlew, so we will be able to use them very quickly. There's a survey toolkit available on curlewwales.org, which goes into more detail on these. And I'd also like to ask to write to your member of Senedd demanding action to save the curlew, because despite the Minister promising to fund the action plan, this has not happened as yet. As part of the studies, with the tagging and various other things, there's been a lot of colour-ringed curlew in mid-Wales. This is showing us a lot of how they move around, where our wintering birds are going to breed, where our breeding birds are going to winter. If you can read a ring, they're very, very difficult to ring. As you can see on the that photograph, the 2-letter code on the yellow ring is very small. But if you can get one and can get a photo of the bird, please do report it. You can look at reporting a colouring bird, and that will take you to the BTO. Or if you look at Mid Wales Ringers website, they have a blog site called Ruffle Feathers, and that has a link to this sightings app, which if you can put in the sightings, it'll automatically tell you where it was ringed. But if we can get any sightings of colouring birds, that would be great as well. So that's a very quick run through of curlew in Wales and work in the biz area. So a lot more details and links to other sites is on curlewwales.org, and has the full action plan on there. And as I say, please get out there this spring, look for curlew, and please send in the records. Thank you.